Whinging Hillary Clinton complains in a new book that they were never going to let me be president. But isn't that a better description of the establishment's attitude towards Donald Trump? Tonight, we break down the plot to subvert American democracy and remove the president that you voted for from office this year. Evening, everyone. Welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. Tammy Bruce and Richard Fowler are here tonight. We'll debate James Comey, who we put on trial in our show last week, and ask, will we ever see equal justice done over the 2016 election? One of the members of Congress behind the criminal referral to the Justice Department of Comey and others will join us live. Also tonight, in Swamp Watch, we take a close look at how President Trump's own appointees are undermining his Drain the Swamp agenda. Plus, my exclusive interview with President Trump's advisor on judicial appointments and how those appointments are helping to defeat the deep state. But first, did you notice how excited the elites are about the Michael Cohen case?
And with all of his legal experience and his personal knowledge of Donald Trump and his acquaintance with Michael Cohen, it is Jay Goldberg's carefully considered legal judgment that the Cohen case is more dangerous to his friend Donald Trump than Robert Mueller's investigation.
We're hearing from the Times and other sources, New York Times, that this investigation, this possible development or endgame in this whole thing involving Michael Cohen may be a bigger danger than Trump than anything else he faces.
So I do think that the investigation in the Southern District is far, far more dangerous. Also means he's not going to fire Mueller, because that's not going to do him any good. He can't go around firing the U.S. attorney in the Southern District also.
So then I saw this, and it all made sense.
That Michael Cohen knows where many, many bodies are buried. They are going to turn him, and when they turn him, the president is going to be in a very, very bad place. And I'm going to make a prediction now. I do not think the president will serve out his term. I just don't.
Here to discuss, author, president of Independent Women's Voice and Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce. Tammy Bruce, it's been so long. I've been desperate to get you on this show. Beth, how long has it been? She's finally here. We're so happy.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Great to have you here. Look, I was wondering, as the Michael Cohen story was developing, why are they so excited about it? Where does this come from, this idea that that's the real thing? Forget about Mueller. We're off Mueller now. We're on to Michael Cohen. And then Stormy Daniels' lawyer gave the game away. They think, OK, this is the way we get rid of Trump and overturn the 2016 election.
Well, it's almost like an addiction, isn't it? It's like the new drug that shows up because you've gotten used to the old drug. It doesn't give you as much of the lift as you expected. Now there's a new thing that might give you the lift that you want. But keep in mind, over the last 2 years, there's always been something that was going to be the thing that took him down. And it's based in a fantasy, but also a little bit of a mania in seeing what you want to see. It's, in a way, a kind of a confirmation bias, that everything that comes forward, you're going to read everything into it that you need for it to be because you're thinking of nothing else. And this, of course, it puts you in a negative position because you're also not seeing the reality of the situation. You can't make decisions properly based on what's true on the ground, the facts of the matter, but also keep in mind, it's also about the addiction of the viewer. Those particular networks where everything is the end game. Everything is going to be Armageddon. Everything is going to be the end of it all. And they've got to keep those people hooked. And they're, as a result, misleading their audiences. They're of course, ruining any kind of reputation that the legacy media ever had. Those of us who look at details and want to provide any kind of analysis for viewership, we do what we can here. And I think, though, that the approach is somewhat different because we really want information to go to the viewer. Though that kind of dramatic dynamic is meant to addict a viewer, but also, I contend, when it comes to the Stormy Daniels situation, that the target is Mrs. Trump, that they need the drama surrounding it because they know that President Trump, he's a man who knows what he wants to do and he's accomplishing it. They want to strike now at his support system. And I contend that a lot of this hysteria is directed at her.
I think that's very, very wise. I think that's exactly right. And you've got this extraordinary phenomenon, which is that if you watch those people for 5 minutes, you'll hear these phrases tripping out like, President Trump's undermining democratic norms. You hear that the whole time. The rule of law and democratic norms. What could be more undermining of democratic norms than to overturn an election result and get the president out of office as they clearly want before the next election.
It's all projection, isn't it? I mean, this is the dynamic of usually, and it's pretty well-worn framework, where you will project onto your enemy what it is you're doing. And we've seen that through this entire process. Even accusations of collusion with the Russians, when it was Hillary that paid for the dossier. The dynamic of, yes, undermining the democracy, when not just now are we seeing this, but for a period of years, the Clintons and Hillary thought this was going to be handed to her. Everyone was so shocked when an outsider didn't win, even though we're supposed to be having free elections, when anybody ostensibly could win. This is what shocked them because, in fact, I think that reveals that they've had their way for at least 2 generations, that there has been maybe the show of democracy, going through the motions, if you will, whereas in fact certain things have been processed in a certain way. The big shock was suddenly the sleeping giant of the voter themselves, this populist revolution, is what changed, and they've had such contempt for the American citizenry. They just simply didn't expect it from us. That gave us the edge. It gives the president the edge. But I'm hoping for both the president and certainly also Mrs. Trump that they are not watching the news as much. At least Mrs. Trump, she's busy raising her child and doing some great charity work and representing this nation beautifully, that she realizes that this is a system that does not only not have her best interests in mind, but they don't have America's best interests in mind either at this point.
You really put your finger on it there when you said that basically for years and years now, it didn't matter who you voted for, you got the same result. And that's why people went for Donald Trump. But what makes me laugh is that phrase that came out of this new Hillary Clinton book, they would never let me be president. She's referring to some mysterious they. Surely it's exactly the opposite. They did everything they can to make her president.
But see, now in her, the blame game, still, the people don't enter into it, do they? For her, it still is this mashup of conspiracies, of particularly powerful groups or people. But it's never occurred to her that we actually went out and voted, that despite all of the legacy media, despite all of the money, $1 billion she spent, that we still thought, wait a minute, we're going to do X. We're not necessarily going to conform. We actually are an independent body that will make a decision. That's why your program matters. It's why Fox News matters, because it's about not conforming. It is really about challenging power and recognizing the power, frankly, the beauty of the American individual, which is what's fueled certainly not just, of course, the establishment of the country, but how we've been able to deal with the challenges we've had for the last 300 years.
Exactly, and that is the big idea underneath this whole populist revolution, and the fact that they can't see it and actually argue against it and claim that they're the ones that really represent the Constitution and so on is just so hypocritical.
But see, that requires ideas, though. What you're hearing and what with your clips that you had there, it's all about these vague emotional pushes. It's never about policy or about the larger idea. Of course, they don't want to talk about policy because actually, if you talk about, what have you got? Progress with North Korea, jobs coming back, wages going up, all of that. That's the last thing they want to talk about. Anyway, we've got to move on. You watched it live last week as we put James Comey on trial. But will there ever be a real-life reckoning for the former FBI director? One of 11 Republican congressmen asking for an investigation into Comey and several other Obama-era officials joins us live on that next. Don't go away.
The person swearing under penalty of perjury is not James Comey.
Okay, well, let's leave it like that. Maybe hang on a second. It's not just Comey, it's a whole bunch of them.
Well, of course it is, absolutely, in various steps. But the facts are that James Comey is one of the people, one of the individuals you just stated yourself that in fact had to put this forward and proffer it to say, let's get the information.
All right, sorry, guys. Last week we put James Comey on trial. You all thought he was guilty. So the question is, what happens next? This week, I wrote an opinion piece on FoxNews.com, and this is part of what I said. There's at least as much reason to suspect that the FBI, Department of Justice, and others in the federal bureaucracy colluded with the Obama administration and Clinton campaign to influence the 2016 election, as there are reasons to suspect that Donald Trump and his associates colluded with the Russians in similar vein. And yet, in this 50-50 swamp of suspicion and confusion, 100% of the investigative energy is going in one direction only. This is making America's divisions deeper by the day. If we want to truly understand what happened in the 2016 presidential election, and if we want to move beyond this polarized political moment, then we have to see equal justice done. James Comey, John Brennan, James Clapper, Hillary Clinton, President Obama, and former Attorney General Loretta Lynch. All of them must be investigated and, if justified by evidence turned up in those investigations, prosecuted. That's what I wrote. But meanwhile, 11 members of Congress last week sent a criminal referral to the Justice Department and the FBI seeking an investigation of James Comey, Andrew McCabe, ex-Attorney General Loretta Lynch, and Hillary Clinton in connection with 2016 campaign controversies. We've got one of those members of Congress joining us live tonight, Florida Republican Congressman Ted Yoho. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Hey, I read your article and you were spot on, and I'm glad for you to bring that out and go that direction.
And likewise, I think that your move last week with your colleagues was spot on. But what I really want to do is not so much go back over the who did what and focus on the question, which is what's going to happen next. I think people watching tonight are so frustrated that, as I said, all the energy is on one side of this. What's actually going to happen? There's so much suspicion now of the behavior of the FBI and so on. You put your referral in. What happens to that?
Well, you're right. The American people are fed up. They want justice. You know, when people go above the law or they think they're above the law, they're frustrated. And there's you can tell why the American people are so frustrated, because nothing gets done up there in this investigation. What I propose, or what I would conjecture here, is we're going to see this web go back to Comey, McCabe, the other people, Miss Clinton, Loretta Lynch, and possibly President Obama.
Okay, but is anything going to happen? I mean, we can all agree with each other about how terrible it is, but what's going to happen? You've got this incredible investigation going on into President Trump and his world. What about the other side? What's going to actually happen?
Well, I think what you're going to see, as this letter stated out, it was very succinct and very detailed on the charges for Miss Clinton, for Mr. Comey, Andrew McCabe, and I think you're going to see this go into an investigation. We're going to keep the pressure up. The American people are going to keep the pressure up on us, you know, the representatives of the People's House.
Well, sorry
and so I think you're going to see this move forward. What's that?
What gives you that confidence? What gives you the confidence that it will, in your words, move into an investigation? Who's going to start it?
Well, I think
Who's
the biggest thing is the biggest thing, it's the right thing to do. It's like you said, it's been one-sided. You know,
I
when
get
James
all that. I'm
Comey
sorry
did
to
what
press
he did,
you on. I'm sorry, Congressman. Yeah. I'm sorry to press you on it and to cut you off. So I don't want to waste time on agreeing with each other. The real question I'm interested in is who's going to make this investigation actually happen? Whose job is it?
It's referred to. Well, it's going to go from the House. Paul Ryan will move forward, or the Judiciary Committee, and then the Intelligence Committee, and then the AG ultimately will decide to do this, or Rod Rosenstein to move forward on this. And this is where it needs to go. I mean, it really does.
So the responsibility. So the only way this happens is if the Attorney General makes it happen. Is that what you're saying?
Right. I mean, it's got to move forward through him. And, I know the letters are out there. We're talking to him. There's people that are talking to him to move this forward. Like you said, the American people are fed up with this, and we need to go down this path.
But so what's the, if you like, the official role of your letter? Is it basically just a press release that adds to the conversation but doesn't move anything forward?
No, I know Ron DeSantis, he's like I am, and the people that sign that, we don't do things for press release. This is something that has to be done. When you got people that, if you go back to the investigation on Donald Trump with the Russian probe, that should never have happened, because that was based on false allegations on the Steele dossier that was all concocted through the Hillary Clinton campaign and Fusion 1. And then the first FISA warrant, maybe that could have been signed, but those other three should never have been signed. Therefore, that investigation should never have happened. It's time to bring that investigation to a close and then go after the perpetrators that concocted that stuff and lied to the committees. It's already documented that they did lie to the committees. So those are the ones that need to be followed, and let that rabbit trail go where it will. I mean, that's really what has to happen. And our goal is to make sure those things happen. We hear it in our districts every time we come back. When is somebody in Washington going to be held accountable? And we're going to make sure that does. And we just keep pressure on them.
Good. I think I understand that it's not it's not within your power or your colleagues to initiate the investigation, but I think you've set it out very clearly for us. I do appreciate that. And I think as far as
I'm glad I cleared
certainly
it.
from the reaction to our show last week is keep up the pressure, because people really want something done. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great night.
So, joining Tammy now on the panel is nationally syndicated radio host and Fox News contributor Richard Fowler, who I don't just suspect, I saw him violently shaking his head almost at everything that was just said.
He was laughing a couple times. He was laughing.
Take it away, Richard.
Well, I mean, I wasn't laughing. I mean, listen, if we want to have an investigation, let's do it. But there's a couple things that was...
Well, hang on, that's an important thing.
Well,
let's do it.
But there's some factual inaccuracies with what the congressman said. Number one, the Russia investigation was triggered by George Papadopoulos. That was in the Devin Nunes memo from the Republican committee. That's a fact, number one. Number two, the letter that was released by these 11 members of Congress, the chairman of the Government Oversight Committee, Trey Gowdy, said himself that letter should be referred back to the Inspector General of the Justice Department, and that's where it should be handled, not by Congress, not by Rod Rosenstein, not by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. It should be handled by the person already handling the internal investigation, the Inspector General, period. So these things have already been hashed out.
Okay, let me ask you a different... I want to put it...
So
take a few steps back, right, and look at it from the perspective of someone who's not following it that closely. And further, I'd ask you to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is part of pro-Trump America, right? And they see all this going on, all this energy devoted to investigating the president. And then they think, hang on a second, I don't know for sure, but it looks to me like there was dodgy stuff going on with the FBI and Comey and nothing being investigated. Don't you think, just in terms of bringing the country together, just for the sake of fairness, you need to have an equivalent investigation on the other side? Do you agree with that?
So I think that's an interesting perspective. And I was sitting in the green room, sort of reading over your op-ed one more time, and it struck me as this, and I think we have a larger problem in this country, and the problem that we have in this country is the criminality of law enforcement is not handled the same way as the criminality of everyday Americans. So if me and Tammy were to break the law, we are treated differently.
Which we would never do.
We would never do. We are treated differently than when police officers or law enforcement breaks the law. They're treated to a different standard.
But we would even have a different standard because we're on television.
Very
so
true.
the average person,
average American breaks the law. They're treated differently.
So there's now, but I would say that facts do matter, and this is a major point. We see it certainly at the local level.
Absolutely.
And we're seeing it unfold here because you've got systems, but you've got systems that have been used to being able to do this for generations. So this is not new. It's not because of Obama. It's not because of Comey. This is something that got settled in, and the fact that it was disrupted, whether you like Donald Trump or not, is what has shocked them. But also, I would contend, everyone has been very sloppy in what it is they've been doing on that side because they genuinely thought it wouldn't matter. And so this is whether it's Hillary and, wiping off her server, or Comey and what he was doing, or Strzok and Page and their text messages. It was like a frat house that was like a toga party, and they thought nothing, because it was going to be a Hillary Clinton presidency, which also tells you that they thought that with that presidency, nothing that they did would matter. And that should frighten us as well.
And let me just go a step further. And when I talk about the criminality of law enforcement, this is the connection that I think people don't make, what might possibly connect the Black Lives Matter movement and the Trump Make America Great Again movement, is that this is the same argument that they're making, is when BLM says we don't have a problem with law enforcement, we have a problem with police brutality and the fact that the criminality of law enforcement isn't treated the same. And what the Trump people are saying is, there's some shadiness with the FBI and nobody's treating it the same.
You know what could solve it?
And this is the same thing, because Eric Garner was choked to death by the police on camera, and all those officers walked. And at the same time, in the FBI, there was some shady text messages, and these people aren't being prosecuted. It's the same level of criminality.
At the same point, in every dynamic, there's also, you've got a sliver of something that's shown on camera, then you've got the larger context of what is going on there. And we can say the same thing when it comes to the government. Wouldn't an interesting solution, though, is to put cameras on everybody at the FBI in the suites? Have a camera on Comey, have a camera on McCabe. But here's where the real danger is. When we think about what's happening and inspector generals and who makes these decisions, already we have a criminal referral to the Attorney General by the Inspector General regarding Mr. McCabe. That is where you start getting into, that was maybe the fruit that was low-lying at this point, sending a message to everyone that something you normally would have gotten away with, not only have you been caught, but you're not going to go and get your pension like Lois Lerner did. We are going to criminally refer you. Now, the next step is, will the Attorney General, with it being a very unusual situation, really bring charges against Mr. McCabe and use that for those who are in the swamp, the bureaucrats, who we don't know their names, who facilitate this, who then will be at least feel free or at least get immunity to speak up about what's been going on at the FBI, because this affects the regular people who are affected by this law enforcement agency being used now as a partisan cudgel. You can't then trust anything else that they do, whether it's missing the terrorists that they knew about, or whether it's about acting as partisan hacks.
I think that's the nub of it, and I think that there's a lot of pressure on the Attorney General to do something, but sadly, it doesn't look like anything's happening. Anyway, I'm sorry we've got to leave it there. Coming up, despite President Trump's agenda, his administration is crawling with lobbyists. The details in tonight's Swamp Watch. But next, our exclusive interview with the man behind Neil Gorsuch's nomination to the Supreme Court, and on how President Trump's judicial appointments are helping to cut back the deep state.
I've seen it all. I've seen politics and government from the inside, and I can see what's wrong with it and what's broken and what needs to be changed.
Wherever I smell hypocrisy, liberals, conservatives, Republicans, Democrats, I will go after them.
We don't have time to dance around the issue. I like to get right to the point. I just come at the news with a different viewpoint.
My job is getting to the bottom line of what is the American people's truth.
Welcome back, everyone. An article caught my eye recently, and its title was this: Trump's new judicial litmus test, shrinking the administrative state. I wanted to find out what was that all about, so I had the pleasure of speaking with Leonard Leo. He's the advisor to the president on judicial nominations and the man that many credit with convincing the president to put Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. I talked to him about how President Trump's judicial appointments are helping to fight the bureaucracy of the administrative state. Take a look. Joining me from Washington, Executive Vice President of the Federalist Society, Leonard Leo. Leonard, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really am thrilled to have you here. I just want to make sure that our viewers understand what a significant person you are. You've been described by some as the most powerful recruiter in the world, the conservative pipeline to the Supreme Court, less kindly perhaps, but just as much emphasizing your influence, the judicial puppet master. What they're talking about is the fact that you're the person that is in the lead in terms of advising President Trump and the administration on judicial appointments, not just most notably Neil Gorsuch, but actually right the way through the judicial system, leaving an incredibly important legacy, probably the most important lasting legacy from this president. And I just wanted our audience to understand that you're in the driving seat there. And I'd love to start with the big picture. What is the legal philosophy you're bringing to that advice that you're giving the president and the administration on judicial appointments?
Well, basically, the idea is that judges ought to be interpreting the Constitution the way the framers meant it to be, according to its words, very specifically, and that the courts have a role to play in enforcing all those structural features of the Constitution that limit the power of our government, because ultimately it's that protection of freedom that the courts can do by enforcing the structural limits on government power.
And do you think that the way that appointments have been made in the past have gone in a direction away from that?
Not in this administration, but in prior administrations, particularly during the Obama administration, there were a lot of judicial appointees who didn't believe that the courts had a role to play in enforcing the structural limits on government power, which are so important to the preservation of freedom and dignity.
So I just wanted to get now into the detail of it. I think the discussion around Neil Gorsuch has been widely had. A lot of people familiar with his views and what he brings to the Supreme Court. I want to focus on a subject that we talk about a lot here on this show, whatever you want to call it, the administrative state, the deep state, the way in which there's this sense of a permanent bureaucracy that Welcome back, everyone. All right, Tammy, Swamp Watch, drain the swamp, Scott Pruitt, what do you think?
Look, I think that the president, of course, as we know, he's serious about that. He is an outsider, but he also, and he wants to drain the swamp, but he also has to run the government. And you saw in the beginning an interesting mix of pulling in people who were part of the government. Reince Priebus is an example. And then you've got the Shulkin, which was a shocking appointment to me. How are you going to reform the VA from a guy who's been in there and part of the problem? So I think it was a combination of him needing people who had experience, who as a result come from the political class, who can run things, while also at the same time hoping that there'll be traitors to their political class and work to dismantle the same thing. But let me just give you a perspective here. The budget for 2019 fiscal year is $4.4 trillion. We just went through the omnibus, which increased the budget by another $1 trillion. For a government this big, and this is the problem, money becomes like water for everyone, not just agency heads, but especially this swampy swamp underneath the heads of all the bureaucrats.
Yes.
The people who've been in there who are civil professionals who are in there for years and decades and who also are working to undermine the president.
Yes.
I think you could work and get a scalp for every single agency if you wanted to based on spending. But I don't recall these conversations either when Barack Obama was using an airplane to fly only his dog to the Hamptons.
Yes, well,
Now, we do need this to change, I agree. But we also need it to go at a point where the president has got to set a tone and tell Pruitt to stop some of the nonsense. But it also has to be, we have to make sure he's got people who do follow his agenda and implement it, while at the same time where we don't accept business as usual, or at least try to cut it down as it occurs. Because otherwise, all we're going to do, and President obviously likes to fire people, but we need to get these things implemented. We've got to call it out when it happens.
Yes.
And with someone like Shulkin, who actually had his chief of staff alter an email.
You're looking very skeptical. Go for it, Richard.
Listen, this is Barack Obama didn't run on a platform to drain the swamp. This has nothing to do with President Obama. This has everything to do with President Donald Trump running on a platform saying he was going to drain the swamp, also running on a platform of saying that I hire the best people. So let's look at the people that he's hired, right? So you have Scott Pruitt, who has wasted taxpayer dollars. So you could blame this on government bureaucrats if you want to, but Scott Pruitt has wasted taxpayer dollars, and he's not the only person, right? I mean, look at this cabinet. You have Ben Carson spent $30,000 on a dining table. You have Betsy DeVos, who before she got to the Department of Education was one of the #1 lobbyists in Michigan, destroying public education. We could have a debate versus charter school versus public school. But when you have somebody who literally lobbied only for charter schools and spent millions of dollars doing it, who now works and runs the Department of Education, that is problematic, right? And so once over and over again, what you see from this administration is he says one thing, but his administration, not him, but his administration does something different. So if this president wants to drain the swamp,
he's frustrated about that.
He should be.
Well, but
he
look,
absolutely should be.
His standard and why we knew that Shulkin was going to have problems and why this is an issue is because the president doesn't like waste. He doesn't like waste. But the issue is that are we going to be consistent in what we want? Conservatives constantly we want smaller government. We want more of our money in the pockets of the average citizen. But as long as Democrats and liberals think government is the solution, it will only get larger and money will become like water in the ocean.
We haven't got time for it. Look, we're going to keep coming. Sorry, we got to stop. We're going to come back to this.
This will be 2 parts. We'll do it next week.
We'll do it next week.
Yes.
Coming up, music superstar Moby sparks debate with his comments on food stamps of all things. My take on that next.